How do you ask a question to the audience? Well, not like that. What I did there in my example, I did everything wrong. I did not give any clear instructions on how to answer the question. The question is super vague, and there's no way in which I could have used your answer, even if I had one, there's no way in which I could have used it for the rest of my presentation. So in this module, we're going to look at how do you ask questions that actually generate some cooperation and genuine interaction with the crowd.
Hi, my name is Markus. I'm a comedian, event host, and speaker. I run this series of workshops called Leadership Lessons from the Comedy Club. And they're all about what companies can learn from comedians. Each workshop has a number of modules, and today's module is all about interacting with the audience by asking questions. Why you should do it, and maybe why you should not do it. Let's jump in.
So, asking audience questions. In that example that I gave you, how do you ask audience questions? I mentioned that I did not give any clear instructions. It was super vague, and additionally, regardless of the answer that I would have gotten, there's no way in which I can incorporate that into the rest of my presentation. And we're going to go through a number of steps that you can do to interact more naturally with the audience, but there's a main point to this particular module. And that is that if you feel like asking a question from the stage, it's probably a bad idea. Most audience questions, if you don't know what you're doing, are probably a bad idea. So that's the main idea. If you still want to do it, we're going to go through a couple of techniques in which you can actually ask meaningful audience questions. So the first problem with that question, where I just said, how do you ask an audience question, is that I did not give you any clear instructions. And that has a couple of different problems. When I just blurt out a question like this, there's a number of possible reactions that the audience could have. One is that maybe one person puts up their hand and wants to answer. The next person might just shout out the answer. The third person may whisper it to their neighbor. The fourth person may just think of the answer in their head. And all of these things are just examples of what can happen when you don't give clear instructions. And I think we can agree that in the absence of clear instructions, all of those things are going to happen and more. And that's not really helping your presentation. So there's a number of steps that we can take to ask better questions, and hopefully by the end of this module we're going to work on that one question and make it into a little bit of a better question. So one way to make this question more concrete and more easily accessible is to do a selection type of question. For example, I could ask you, who here likes asking audience questions? Now suddenly, rather than being a very broad question, now it's a selection question. Either you like it or you don't like it, and you can react in some way. But an even better way for me to do it would be to add some clear instructions. So for example, I could say, if you like asking audience questions, then please raise your hand. Now we're both having a very clear and concise question and a clear instruction on how you could actually answer that, and I think that's going to be helpful to everybody. So in that example I said, please raise your hand. What are the other things that you could do to indicate that you agree? Give me some, just shout it out the answer. You could nod, absolutely. What else? You could get up, you could stand up, yes. What else? What else could you do? You could shake your head exactly that you don't want to participate. That's a very good point. And then you could also give a big cheer. And this is what you often do at the comedy club. The question might be something like, if you are from Switzerland, please give me a big cheer. And there's a number of things that are really helpful about the cheering solution, because when you're in a dark comedy club, if you raise your hand, nobody's going to be able to see it. So you're not helping yourself. So you have to have something that gives off a sound so that the person can see. In addition, that also builds energy, because when people clap, it increases the mood in the room. So if you're from Switzerland, please clap your hands. It's actually a very good technique for asking an audience question. And of course, there could be other things as well. You could woo, or you could ask them to go away, like they do in the UK. So some kind of audible reaction. The kind of questions that I'm talking about in this particular module are not rhetorical questions. So what I'm talking about here are questions where I actually want an answer. And of course, you could also do a rhetorical question like, wouldn't it be great if there was world peace or something like that? But in this module, I'm talking about actual literal questions. The next point that I think is very important is about, if you're going to be asking a question to the audience on any kind of stage, you need to know what to do with the answer. And this, I think, is a big problem, and a lot of speakers on the corporate stage particularly forget about this piece. They might just ask some kind of question at the start that leads nowhere. For example, I might be, let's say that I'm doing a talk about my journey to Nepal. I might say at the beginning of the show, I might say, raise your hand if you've ever been to Nepal. But what am I going to do with that answer? Probably nothing. Because imagine that everybody raises their hands, am I going to change my speech? Imagine that nobody raises their hands, am I going to change my speech? No. So if I don't know what I'm going to do with the answer, then I'm not going to ask the question. That's the key point here. Another point related to, another example from this is actually something that I saw at a TEDx conference that I organized last year. There was a lady giving a talk about climate change. And in the draft, she had the following question. How much money do you think world governments spent on subsidies to oil companies last year? That question is a terrible question because A, nobody can relate to it, and regardless of what the answer is, there's no way in which I can take any of that audience interaction to continue my speech. And the reason why that kind of question is super hard to relate to is that I don't know if it's $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion or $1 quadrillion. So if I'm not going to do anything with the answer, don't ask the question, is the point.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying this workshop. If you know somebody who might enjoy this content, please go ahead and share with them. And if you would like to book this for yourself, you can find all the contact information at the end of the video. Now, let's continue the workshop.
So that was my point about, you have to know what you do with the answer. But there's an even higher level of a quality question, and that is when you know what the answer is going to be. And especially if you know that the answer is going to be yes. So I have this one story where I talk about my Swedish accent, and then I have a question at the end where I say, would you like to know the difference between the Swedish accent and the Norwegian accent? And when that joke works, everybody, or at least one person in the audience will say yes. And then I can continue. Yeah, I would like to know it as well, so I can avoid those Norwegian bastards. So that usually works pretty well because I know that the answer is going to be yes. If we're having a great show, for example, at the end of the show, I might ask a question, do you think we should do another show? And then people are going to cheer and say yes. So one thing is that you know what to do with the answer, but if you know what the answer is, that's even better. And those are the kind of questions that I recommend asking to the audience. So those are kind of, clear yes or no questions. How do you actually ask open questions from the audience or to the audience from the stage? Well, you don't. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of this module, is that don't ask open questions because you're not going to be able to do anything meaningful with the answer. There's another two aspects that I want to cover in this block, and they are about timing and technology. That example that I gave before with who here has been to Nepal at the beginning of my speech about Nepal, that's a terrible question, A, because I'm not going to do anything with the answer, but it's also a terrible question because of the timing. When I have a question like that at the beginning of my speech, it's almost like I'm asking for permission. And you never want to ask for permission. You want to come across confident and in control. And this applies equally to the corporate stage and to the comedy stage. You cannot ask for permission when you're on the comedy stage. You're going to be slaughtered. So there's no point in asking a question like that, especially not at the beginning of your speech. And then there's the bit about technology. In the corporate world, I've seen a lot of examples lately where we're using technology to have audience interaction. This is in a physical meeting, a face-to-face meeting. So you might, for example, have an app or a mobile website where you go to, and the question on the PowerPoint may be something like this. How much did we grow our revenue in Europe in the last quarter? And then there's four answers. There's 2%, 4%, 6%, 8%. And the instruction is to go on that app or go on that website and vote. This is a terrible idea. A, you're not going to do anything interesting with that answer whatsoever. But B, you're taking away the focus. You're taking away the focus from the stage and to your device that you have in your hand. Which then means that you're going to check your emails, you're going to check your text messages, you're going to check your social media, and suddenly you lose the crowd. There is no point in asking a question like that with the use of any kind of technology. What you can actually do instead, you can do a simple show of hands. Who thinks it's 2%? Who thinks it's 4%? And so forth. Still, terrible question, but at least better than asking it using any kind of technology. So as I conclude my block here about asking audience questions, the first point is this. If you feel like asking a question from the audience, if you feel like asking a question from the stage, don't do it. It's almost always a bad idea. If you're still going to do it, make sure that you give clear instructions. Make sure that you know what to do with the answer. Make sure that you know what the answer is, ideally. Don't put it at the beginning of your speech, and don't use technology.
This series, Leadership Lessons from the Comedy Club, combines skills that I've learned both from performing on stage, hosting shows, and producing events and shows. And each of these skills I put into specific modules that you can learn as well. For example, in the performing category, you can learn how to deal with distractions, practical things like how to use a microphone, and also the value of showing vulnerability on stage. In the event hosting category, you can learn how to warm up the audience, introduce a speaker, and also how to be the backup when something goes wrong. And in the production category, you can learn how to plan a lineup that supports your objectives, how to collect useful feedback during and after the show, and finally, in general, how to run meetings that are more fun and inclusive. This workshop series, Leadership Lessons from the Comedy Club, is available both as online sessions and as face-to-face workshops. And you can include those modules that are of most value to you. If you're interested in learning more about this, please see the contact details at the end of this video. You can also reach me at markuspresents.com.